a bride getting ready for her wedding, that's not normally like an open invite to anyone. That's a very select group of people who are very dear and very close to a bride, and suddenly almost a stranger is allowed in with a camera. It's quite an odd concept, isn't it?
It is. It's also such... I always feel so privileged in those moments.
Yeah.
It's a real honour to experience those really intimate moments. And I've seen dads break down in front of their daughters when they've seen them in their dress. I've seen couples read private vows to each other, and they've only allowed me to come with them just to document it.
Hey, I'm Matt. Welcome to my podcast, The Imagining, a time to explore the imagination, creativity, and mental health. All of the conversations I'm having form part of the research for my new book. I hope that you have the opportunity during this time to discover something new about yourself. So, I have you pinned down in my books as a dancer turned photographer. Tell me about the story. You grew up, the first time I heard your name ever uttered was because you were at the same dance school as my little sister. My memories of ballet dancers were my sister, sorry Meg, crying pretty much every Saturday morning due to having her hair contorted into a very specific shape. What was dancing like for you as you were growing up?
Obviously it was going to be a big part of my life anyway, because my mum ran the dance school, and it very much runs through the family on both sides. So my dad has always been very much into like the musical theatre world, and relatives on his side are also in the dancing world. So it was inevitable that I was going to end up dancing at some stage. There was never any force to do that. That was made very clear at the beginning, which I think was really important. But I did have a good experience with it. I did really enjoy the musicality side of it because I also studied music. So that side of it for me came very naturally. Technique I was maybe working on a little bit harder than the musicality side.
What did it feel like being a dancer? Like, because it's just not a world that I relate to in many senses, because like I definitely probably grew up in a time, even still just 20 years ago, where guys dancing felt still quite very distant. What did it feel like to be a dancer when you were younger?
For me, I think in some ways it was a form of escapism from reality, and it was nice to just switch off from the world for that hour that we were in the studio. There were probably one or two boys that were in the school, and it was very noticeable that it was a very female heavy hobby, or art should I say. But it was nice to, at a young age, I think, to see that there were boys that were trying to come into that world, and it was okay for them to try that. It was like a safe space, and they'd clearly had so much courage to
massive courage
come and do that.
I just remember with even the few amount of guys that I knew who danced, you know, is suddenly if you're a dancer you're gay, or you want to be a woman, or it must have been so tough for them guys 100%. Growing up doing dancing. Did you feel at that time, what did you feel at that time in your life when you were younger was like the biggest creative expression that you had?
I believe it would have been through equally my dancing and my music. I was, I suppose, introduced to discipline at a very young age. So going to dance classes and experiencing dance exams where you have to behave in certain ways. And looking back now, you can see how much it helps you in your other areas of life.
Yeah.
Alongside that, I was learning to play the clarinet. I was taking my music exams, and I was learning so many other skills
Yeah.
through those things. And yeah, I think like with the dancing, with both of them, it was just that bit of escape from
Yeah.
everything else going
Did
on.
you feel that you needed that specifically?
I
Like escape?
I think I probably didn't realise how much it was helping me. I could have easily, don't get me wrong, there were definitely some weeks where I didn't want to go to dancing or I didn't want to go to my clarinet lesson. I remember, especially when I was in college actually, and obviously you're sort of 17, 18, and I feel like for a lot of people it's just such a funny age and quite a difficult age because there's so much pressure around you to decide on what you're going to do with the rest of your life. And I still didn't know which direction I was going. And I think my motivation had got lost with a lot of my interests, I think. And I think because of that, I was just not putting in the same energy as I was maybe when I was younger. Obviously, you have more things to start worrying about as you get older. And yeah, but interestingly, music and dance for me stopped around that age when I left college and started working, earning money. And fast forward again to the pandemic. Obviously, it was such a awful time in so many ways, but I managed to turn it into quite a positive experience. I think I saw it as an opportunity, and I actually took up dancing again, but I ended up teaching adult classes on Zoom because obviously everything was moving on to Zoom. And yeah, and also with the music, a little bit before that, I actually was performing in an orchestra for a number of years. And I think some of it, maybe, again, it comes back to the discipline. And obviously when we're younger, you know, we're doing all our exams and everything. And I wonder if I maybe just got to a point where I'd had enough of exams and just going to a dance class, just to dance for the love of it, and just going to orchestra to play and just have that nice experience and just play with no pressure was just a totally different feeling, and that's what I love. So I don't know if maybe a lot of that was to do with pressures, outside pressures maybe. But coming back to it slightly older, I realised how fortunate I was to have those in my life.
That's amazing. And what was the transition process from what life was like then to what you're doing now? I know that when we've spoken before, you kind of had this middle moment like everyone does where you did a lot of dancing, maybe felt very creative when you were in your teenage years, and then you had a bit of a reality shock of getting a job. What was that like, and how did that job turn into being a successful photographer?
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
I think when I reached that age where I knew I had to start earning money, I think I believed that there was a certain way or certain path that you had to follow. I think at that point I didn't realise I could create my own path.
Yeah. I don't think you're obviously not alone in that.
No.
Because I think we grew up in the same town, in the schools just down the road from each other. And I think there was a prevailing mindset of, right, you've done the child thing now, time to get a job, and better make it a good one because you need money. That was at least my experience. I'm assuming that probably similar for you.
Yeah.
Even coming from a home where dancing was such a big thing, there was still that kind of thing going on in you which says, time to grow up, go get a job.
Yeah. I think for me it was very much conforming into that routine of, right, you need to go and find a job. If it's in the city, great. I believed I had to eventually get to London. So for me, I did local admin 9 to 5 jobs. And the goal was to eventually work in London,
Right.
which I did for a year.
And it went really well.
Something like that. So that year in London, it was invaluable in many ways. And I had some incredible experiences. But I realised I just wasn't wired for that lifestyle. And it was quite hard in some ways because you instantly think, what's wrong with me? I definitely had that thought because I was looking at my friends around me, like other people working these jobs. And I was...
They were happy, I guess.
Yeah.
Or at least like just okay with what was happening.
Definitely. So that was quite difficult. And when I did come back to work locally again, I did feel like I'd failed because I'd left working in London.
Yeah.
I went back into working in the NHS, which is where I was before. I had some lovely jobs working at the NHS. But again, it was going back into that 9 till 5 routine. And I thought, why am I still struggling with this? And I had nowhere to release my creativity. So I imagine that played a big part in that struggle.
Struggling. And then you picked up a camera, I guess, somewhere along the line. And that is what happened next.
Yeah, I always have had a love for photography. My dad always had the video camera out, always taking pictures of us growing up. So I was exposed to that at a very young age. And as I got older, I was always the one with the camera if I was out with friends. It's mad that you just snap away on your phone now. But back then it was like, who's bringing the camera? And yeah, I remember, interestingly, it was when I was working at the NHS, there was an awards evening and there was a photographer within the company and he knew that I enjoyed photography. And he said, there's going to be a photo exhibition at the awards evening. Why don't you put a couple of pieces up? And I thought, okay, yeah, why not? And I printed 2 of my favourite images at the time. And
what were they?
It was, so the first one was of the colourful beach huts on Mersey Island, which is one of my happy places. And the other one was of Southend Pier at sunset.
Both involving water, so terrible choices.
Good.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
And on the awards evening, I went over to the area where the photo exhibition was and was just mingling with people. And I heard someone behind me say, I want that picture in my hallway. And I turned around and it was one of the admin staff pointing at my picture of the beach huts.
Oh my gosh.
And it was the first time I'd made money from photography. What a great feeling.
What an incredible moment.
It was.
And it's nice that it wasn't your mum saying it either. Like, it's such a special thing that happens when someone looks at a piece of art that you've made or worked on and has an emotional reaction to it. I was obviously, we were talking about it earlier, I was recently in Guatemala taking photos for a charity. And I think you might agree, when you're taking photos, it feels a bit like, sometimes it feels like a bit, well, that was good. What did I achieve by doing that? It feels a bit random sometimes and maybe a bit pointless, I think. And sometimes you get in a groove and it feels really great. But a lot of the time, it's a bit of a strange concept in some ways, taking photos. And someone at work then messaged me a couple of weeks later, basically saying that some of the photos have moved them to tears. And
wow.
And it's an incredible moment when someone looks at a piece of art that you've made and
it is beautiful,
says something like, I want that in my house, or that moved me to tears, or I love that. Do you identify that as a moment then of like, not changing your life in, I guess that's a big statement, but did that really alter the trajectory? That's a hard word to say.
I'm glad you said it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Did that change your plans hearing that in that moment?
Something definitely happened in that moment. And I think, like you said, just hearing it from someone that you're not connected to in any way really filled me with just some confidence, I guess, and the feeling of like opportunity, like where could this go? It's, I think in that moment a door opened, and that was when things slowly started to happen, and I gradually started to take little jobs at the weekends, and it became a bit more of a regular thing. But yeah, it was definitely like a magical moment.
Do you feel like, this is a hard one to measure really, do you feel like there's maybe a lot of people that feel how you felt before kind of stepping into what you do now? Do you feel like there's a lot of people who are just hating the grind and are just waiting for someone to say, we have a photo gallery where you could put your pictures? And what would your advice be to them?
I do agree. I think, well, I've heard it as well. There's so many people that are in jobs that they're in it for the reasons I was: a secure salary, security, job security, but they're not getting that fulfillment. Some people are okay with that, which is great, and I admire those people. But many people like us, we need something that we can.
Well, yeah. I mean, I guess it's the thing. It speaks to the deepest part.
Yeah.
You know, it's hard to detach your emotion from your job, I guess.
Yeah.
It's hard to sit and not explore the world and try new things. I think that's always been one of the limiting things from my perception about the 9 to 5 kind of concept of working, is that it becomes very hard to respond to, oh, I want to try that, or I want to give time to getting good at that. And I wonder if there's a lot of people that feel like that.
Yeah, I think it's so easy to fall into that routine, and you're subconsciously just day to day getting on the 7:30 train, heading to work or driving to work, coming home of an evening, dinner, unwind, go to bed, repeat. And it's so easy to fall into it, but I think it's very hard to get out of it. And I definitely experienced that. And I think for anyone that does feel like that, and they feel that they want more job fulfillment, maybe they've got something they feel they could offer, I think the one piece of advice that I would offer, and something that I found has really helped me in the last few years, is just to network, meet people, go along to a networking coffee morning. I joined a networking group again in the pandemic. I really, as you can tell now, I was looking.
You did a lot in the pandemic. You're like, please.
I didn't have a lot going on.
I'll even swim in the ocean.
And honestly, just even if you don't get any work from it straight away, it's incredible and so powerful making those connections, because you never know further down the line when someone might actually need something from you, or they might come to you with an opportunity.
And and just say even something as simple as, there's a local photo gallery that we're putting on, you should do something like that. And
there's so much online as well, on social media. There's constant competitions, and I saw one recently actually, and it always clearly says for amateurs and professionals. I see some incredible photos and videography from amateurs, and I think, just like, what have you got to lose? Just go for it.
For sure. So stepping into being a professional photographer, how's that been? Like, what is it like to be a professional photographer? Because I've never really, although I do a lot with a camera, I've never felt comfortable with calling myself professional. I still feel amateur in many ways.
I love your work.
What's it like? What's your day-to-day like? Obviously, a lot of your photography work is within the wedding industry.
I think in general day-to-day life, incredibly, more time is probably spent at the computer, editing, tweaking, uploading images to galleries, emailing clients, keeping up that relationship with your customers. Because I don't really like that word, customers, clients or couples, families. There's so much work that goes on behind the scenes, and when I'm out behind the camera, that's the bit I'm obviously loving. I love being behind the camera and just being a fly on the wall. I do like that approach with my work, is that I just try to blend in with the crowd. But being a full-time photographer, it definitely has its highs and lows. I wouldn't change it for the world. But being your own boss is not the easiest. Again, discipline comes back into it. Really scheduling your days to make sure you're ticking those.
Oh, man, it's exhausting. Isn't it?
It's hard. And again, this is where network is so important, and community. I'm very passionate about the community in the industry that we're in, and especially in the last few years, it's been so nurturing and encouraging. It's educational, and you're all going through the same experiences. And when there's opportunities to like co-work or go to workshops and things, it's so nice to be together, and you're with people that understand you. And I think that's what's really important, is just finding your people.
What you like as a photographer? Like, if I want to book you, like, who are you like as a photographer?
So on a wedding day, for example, I like to think of myself as another bridesmaid. I'm going to blend in.
Wow.
Blend in.
Do you wear a bridesmaid's dress?
Not quite. But I will totally be on bridesmaid duties. If there's problems with the dress, or the guys are having trouble with buttonholes, I'm on it. And
which they always are.
Always. You'll know that as well. And I think that's so important, because my main priority is to make sure that everyone else is super relaxed. And I don't want them to be too aware of me with the camera. So by doing those things, it helps me blend in. And
because it's a super intimate role, isn't it, a photographer?
Totally.
Whether that's at a wedding or anywhere else, I've always found it to be, you are in places which you normally would not be or shouldn't be. You know, if you think like a wedding, a bride getting a bride getting ready for her wedding, that's not normally like an open invite to anyone. That's a very select group of people who are very dear and very close to a bride, and suddenly almost a stranger is allowed in with a camera. It's quite an odd concept, isn't it?
It is. It's also I always feel so privileged in those moments. It's a real honour to experience those really intimate moments. And I've seen dads break down in front of their daughters when they've seen them in their dress. I've seen couples read private vows to each other, and they've only allowed me to come with them just to document it. And even weddings like your sister's, I mean, I felt so privileged to be there, but I felt it was so unfair, because not everyone could be there. You couldn't even be there. You were watching on Zoom. And I was counted as one of the numbers that were allowed to be there. And I remember just sitting in the back garden with them after all their photos, and they made me feel so welcome, and we had such a lovely time. But I couldn't help but think, I shouldn't be in this seat.
Well, I guess it's where the responsibility really takes a high thing. It's made me think of a question which I wasn't really has taken me by surprise a little bit. In some ways, it sounds like you're performing a mental health related role as a photographer in a lot of situations. And I'm sure there's a lot of photographers who bring the mental health down in environments who can be very invasive and very intrusive. But in certain scenarios, like photographers become, you know, a consistency to an otherwise hectic day. And if you can be the right sort of person, you can really provide a level of care for people, can't you?
Absolutely. You almost become like a therapist on the day. I've had situations where things have maybe not gone to plan and you just go into comfort mode and reassure them everything will be fine. And they do lean on you.
Yeah.
Because you're experienced, and I suppose we are giving off that nice kind of warm and confident.
Yeah. Been here, done it before type vibe.
They naturally sort of come to you and rely on you. And yeah, it's incredible, really. You don't realise how much until you're sort of speaking about it, really.
Yeah. And it's only just occurred to me because I think I often think of photographers more in a case of bad photographers who will steal moments from people. So a big thing in my photography work has always been about either trying to maintain the level of dignity someone has or increase the level of dignity that someone has by taking their photo. I mean, me and you work in very different. I work in documentary style photography, often in really chaotic and terrible situations, and you work in environments that are like can sometimes be the best day of people's lives. So we're right at the opposite end of the spectrum. In either scenario, I think I often think of photographers as more likely to be the sort of person that steals attention, just wants things to be done their way so they can get the right shot. But actually it seems profoundly important that photographers are people that really create space for people and be person-centered first kind of practice. You know, our job is to build people up and make people feel beautiful and make people feel seen and heard, not to, you know, take away their attention from what's important or catch them in a bad moment or use them to raise money necessarily, like by just getting the sad shot that everyone wants to see, that you're accustomed to seeing on children in need programs or whatever. Like there's a lot of ethical kind of concerns around photography, isn't there?
100%. There's so much in reading moments and, like you say, kind of knowing when it's appropriate to take pictures and when it's not. There are definitely moments during weddings that I will put the camera down if I feel that it's a bit intrusive. But I think after the experiences I've had, I like to think I know when it's good to step in and capture and when it's good to step back. I've definitely had some really emotional weddings where there's been missing family members and you have to be really sensitive to the day and the situation. But yeah, there's definitely a huge part of our job that is just focused around being so aware of people and just reading the day, really.
And I guess that speaks into, I mean, this is a really beautiful point because I think it speaks into so many jobs. The more I'm thinking about it as we both reflect on it, that, you know, event organizers or anyone that's like involved in an experience of someone's life, from dentists to people that invest money on people's behalf, to a certain level, we're all responsible for looking out for the mental health of each other and creating safe spaces for each other. I just never considered that photographers were like that. I mean, but it makes perfect sense to me because your personality and I guess a reason why you're maybe so successful isn't just down to the quality of your photos, but is down to the quality of your character. I mean, it's my first-hand experience of you because you were the photographer at my wedding and, like you said, my sister's wedding, and pretty much all of my family's weddings at this point. So
Family photographer.
yeah, you're just taking all of my inheritance.
I love it.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm glad that you're living your best life on my inheritance.
I'll remember that.
But it speaks of your character, I think.
Thank you.
And it's really, yeah, it's a really beautiful thought.
And I think my mum actually reminded me of this the other day, but when I get repeat work, so I photographed the wedding, happened recently. I had a couple get in touch. They'd had their baby's first birthday is approaching, and they said, we'd love some family photos. Can you come and take some pictures? And again, it's that I get that same feeling of just feeling so honoured and privileged to be there capturing that moment. And I think it's, like you say, it's the person and the character that they're investing in. I don't think it's the product always, which I find really fascinating.
Yeah.
It's all about connection. And I was listening to a podcast the other day, actually, and they were talking about how it's very much about building a feeling as a brand. You don't want to be selling to people. You want to be almost creating a community. Like, we want to have our own communities with our clients, and we want them to have access to this space and just know what we're all about. The product is a totally different subject.
I mean, as well though, just to clarify, Lottie's photography is beautiful and incredible. So your product is incredible.
Thank you very much.
But your way of holding people is something I really admire.
Thank you.
The question that I would like to ask next is about your inspiration, and I asked Liza just before who recorded her episode earlier. I think it's really key to identify the inspiration behind some of these things, because the chapter that I've written the first half, or I'm writing the first half of my book at the moment, which is all about the premise of the imagination is a factory of beauty and anxiety. The first half is just explaining that concept. Second half is, if that is the case, how do we mitigate anxiety, try and alleviate the symptoms of it? And increase beauty. How do we be more creative and put more beautiful things into the world? Everything from a well-made cup of tea, a nice compliment, a piece of artwork, mending someone's shoe when it gets broken. Beauty is all part of that. I think unless you have inspiration, it becomes very hard to really care about whether you're reducing your anxiety or creating beauty. And I think inspiration and hope is such a pivotal part of trying to increase them areas in your lives. What for you is the inspiration or inspirations that have really helped guide you and get you through the journey of your life? So
from a young age, my granddad was always, and my nana as well, they were always so passionate about our careers. Even when I was in my 9 till 5, they were like, you're doing so well, this is great. Like, they always made me feel good. And there's one memory actually that I wanted to talk about. If we rewind back to my school days, I was heavily involved in my music, and I was in the school orchestra. And I think when I was around 13, possibly, I'd seen the choir perform in assemblies and certain concerts. And I just remember thinking, I really want to be in that. I want to give that a go. And I was quite quiet at school. So I think for a lot of people, it probably would have been quite a shock to see me up singing on stage. But I think that was what was giving me the fear of actually doing it, because I had this quiet label, but I really wanted to join the choir. And they would always practice in lunch breaks, I think. And I remember going to the classroom where they would have practice, and I was on my own, and I stood outside the door about to walk in to say I'd like to join. And I stopped and I couldn't open the door. And I don't know if that was, I didn't know at the time, but it was probably a bit of anxiety, that about to try something new feeling. And I stood outside, and in that moment, instead of walking away, I created a solution. I'd never done this before, I don't think, but I came up with a solution in that moment, and I thought, I'm going to count down from 5, and when I get to 1, I'm going to open the door. And it's probably things I've learned from people around me.
Yeah.
And you sort of subconsciously store it somewhere. And it counted down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I opened the door, and they all looked at me, and I thought,
oh no,
well, I'm in.
I'm in.
I'm in. What do I do now? And within seconds, they were smiling and welcomed me over. And I just remember thinking, I had to sort of take a minute to adjust, because it was quite a big moment for me as an individual, to just open that door. And I remember going home and sharing that story with the family. And yeah, they were saying that's brilliant. And I remember in particular speaking to my grandparents about it, and they were like, that is absolutely brilliant, well done. And as I got older, my granddad, well, everyone would, to be honest. I think my mum actually reminded me of it the other day. But I do remember having conversations with my granddad about it and applying it to other areas of life. And he'd always say, remember that day you opened the door to join the choir? And I was like, yeah.
Remember that day. Even to this day, I guess it's still like,
yeah, definitely.
do something that scares you. Get into the ocean.
Yeah.
I wonder as well if you would just, there's a story that it was your grandfather that gave you, right? Could you just share that story with us?
So when I was around 14, I think, so yeah, it was all very close together during my school days. And my granddad was very passionate about learning and was always so interested in what we were doing at school and everything. And we've got several members in our family that are self-employed. And I think he must have known, but he knew that we all had this creative flair in us and thought, not sure you're going to go the 9 to 5 route, but there was always encouragement from him to just follow our dream. Don't feel you've got to conform with the crowd. And he gifted me a book one Christmas, I think it was. And it's incredible how these conversations come back round to this. But in the book, he wrote a message in the beginning on the front page. And the book is called Jonathan Livingston Seagull, by the way. I'll explain it in a second. But the message went along the lines of, this book is for people that don't follow the crowd. This book is for people that don't follow the crowd. This book is for people that are brave. This book is for people like you. And like that feeling I got when I sold that picture in the photo exhibition, it just filled me with this hope and excitement, opportunity. Like, there is so much more out there. And the message in the book is generally, don't feel you've got to follow that grind. If that's not for you, follow your dreams. And it's about battling those inner voices that we all experience at times, and finding your people to encourage you on that journey. It's interesting, like, saying it out loud, because I'm thinking, I've done that now. But it's
You've lived out the journey.
So the story is about a seagull called Jonathan Livingston, and he finds it really hard to live the life of a seagull. So flying from coast to coast, finding food, he thought there must be more to life than this. And for the rest of his flock, they didn't question it. They just did. And he wanted so much more. And his dream was to be the fastest seagull. And whilst the flock were looking for food, he would be soaring through the sky and really trying to perfect this skill of flying faster. And yes, he got questioned, he got laughed at. And later on in the story, he finds his people, his birds, and they are with him on this journey, and they encourage him to obviously follow that dream, but they also encourage him to teach. So teach others. There are more people out there like you that want to be on your path, but they can't quite, they might not have the tools or the courage. And it kind of ends with him teaching others that want to be on that journey, that they can connect with him.
Such a beautiful story, isn't it?
It's lovely. And when I read it when I was young, I probably took different messages from it, but even just talking about it now and reading it now, it's quite emotional. But I can see that I've like followed that journey.
That's really beautiful. Thank you so much.
Oh,
it's
thank you
been
for
such a beautiful experience speaking with you.
Thank you.
You are an incredible artist and an even more incredible person. You're doing such a good job. Where can people connect with you, find your work? If they want to have you come and counsel them through your wedding to me, then
I think the best place currently is to find me on Instagram. So I'm Lottie with an IE, Lottie_photography. And drop me a DM. Let's have a chat. Website is lottiephotography.com. I imagine you'll link this up, but Instagram seems to be the place to be at the moment. It's where all the cool people hang.
What can I say? Both me and you are just trying to be cool.
We're trying.
That's
anyway.
the game. That's the game. Cool. Thanks so much, man. I hope that you have a really lovely rest of your day. On your birthday, no less.
Oh, thank you. Too kind.
Happy birthday to you. I'm not going to sing the rest. It'll take you too long.
Oh.
Exactly. Sorry. You only get the first couple of lines. You're not that special.
It was going so well. I was tearing up and everything.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for tuning in and listening to this episode of The Imagining. I hope that you've had the opportunity to discover something new about yourself. If you wouldn't mind and you enjoyed listening, then I would be really appreciative if you subscribed on whatever channel you're listening on.